Hey there, YouTube friends. Welcome or welcome back to my cozy art channel. If you're new here, my name is Melanie and I'm the artist behind the Swimming Owl. We are going to be doing another color along today, and today we're actually going to color a subscriber request, which is pretty fun. Normally I wouldn't choose a page like this because I like to color more like landscapes or inanimate objects, but today we're actually going to tackle a page with these two cute little squirrels or chipmunks, or I guess they could be either one, that looks like this, and we're gonna see what we can come up with. This subscriber mentioned that backgrounds tend to be kind of tricky for them, and so I'm gonna see what we can come up with for the background on this page. I'm kind of thinking I wanna go with a glowy either sunrise or sunset situation, and maybe add in some of those really pretty soft bokeh effects in the background, which are kind of like a light circle that you might see from light coming through. So we're going to play with that idea, see what we can do. I've never attempted this in a coloring page before, so it's going to be a first for all of us. I will be using mostly Prismacolor pencils today. I was gifted some for Christmas, so I know a lot of you tend to have those pencils, so maybe you'll be able to follow along a little more easily. I will try to make note of the colors that I'm using in little tags in the video throughout, as long as I remember to do it. So editing Melanie, please remember to give people the color names. And somehow I forgot to mention the actual book that we're coloring in, and that is going to be the Whimsical Woodland Coloring Book that I illustrated. This one's one of my best sellers. So grab your copy of that if you have it. You can also get a full download of the book in my Etsy shop. So if you don't have the physical book, you can go download it right now and print out the pages, and you will be ready to color right away. So let's dive into coloring. I'll show you my setup here in just a second. For today, we are coloring these little cuties that are sharing a little snack. And before I begin coloring, I'm always going to put a piece of card or cardstock or cardboard in between my pages to prevent any kind of transfer or indentation on the other pages. Then I'm going to clip this in place just to keep it from sliding around. I will be using a combination of an electric sharpener and my little handheld Prismacolor sharpener. I'll be using an assortment of Prismacolor Premiere pencils. I often like to add some sort of white at the end. I will be utilizing the colorless blender. And then for our color palette today, I'm going to be staying in this section here. So right along in this section of the color palette, I'm not really going to touch anything down here. And if we look at the other side here, so on this color wheel, imagine not using the most saturated versions of these colors, but more like working in these areas in here. So that's kind of what my color palette's going to look like today, is this area in here. Kind of some really warm buttery yellows, a slight bit of peachy orange, a bit of purple, and then my little friends here are going to be kind of warm browns. Okay, so one of the first things I'm going to do in order to achieve this background that I'm hoping to achieve is I'm going to put in some guidelines for myself, some little circles in the background. I'm taking a very, very light buttery yellow color and just giving myself some faint circle guidelines, which are going to be the areas that I leave the lightest color. I'll be coloring them in a little bit, but nowhere near as dark or as saturated as the rest of the background. So I'm just going to be sprinkling these all around. I'm not going to make this effect anywhere near as intense as that reference photo. I'm just going to sprinkle them around, and I am going to have some that are overlapping like that example there, some that are just off by themselves, some that are sort of falling off the edge of the page so that it feels really organic. And I'm going to try my best not to create any unintentional like lines or patterns of them. I'm really trying to make sure they're sprinkled around evenly throughout the background. And if you choose to do this, if you do not have one of these circle making tools, you could use a small coin, the inside of a washi tape, anything that's kind of small and circular like that. You don't have to have this tool by any means. Alternatively, you could skip that step entirely and just start coloring in your background and then using an eraser to erase away really soft circle shapes. That's not going to give you as clean of a circle or as bright as it could be if you leave part of the paper somewhat free of pigment or color. But it is definitely an option if you just want to use an eraser. In fact, towards the end of this background, I do erase away some circles, some slightly smaller sized circles, and it did work pretty darn well. So if you don't want to trace in circles first because that feels too tedious, you don't have to. You could definitely try the eraser trick. And I also encourage you to try this on like a practice sheet. If you're really nervous about messing up your actual coloring sheet first, try it on a practice square, especially if you have this coloring book or you've downloaded it. I do provide practice sheets at the beginning so you can try out different techniques like this. I did not actually practice this technique before I just jumped in and tried it on this coloring page, but I am pretty happy with how it turned out after all. There are some things that I might do a little bit differently next time, but I think this is a super fun background idea that I encourage you to try. Now, as for actually coloring it, my approach here is to put down a base layer of this creamy, buttery yellow color all on the entire background, but avoiding the circles that I put in, keeping those a nice bright white for the most part. And you'll see that I kind of change up my technique for how I color around those circles and the background. Sometimes I'll color with the side of my pencil to cover more area more quickly. Other times I will come in more softly with the pointed tip of the colored pencil. So definitely feel free to play with how you hold your pencil and see what feels the most natural to you. And then around the outsides of these circles, I very softly kind of go over the circle over and over and over again to make a really nice soft blurry edge on it. I'm also trying to keep the center of this coloring page quite light. So the area closest to our little furry friends in the middle will be very light, and I'll create a darker border or edge with more color and pigment later. But I'm trying not to press too hard with my pencil in this center area to create a focal point so that it really pulls your eye towards the center, towards the action of this coloring page, towards what's happening, the cute little moment in the middle. By the way, throughout today's video, you may hear little squeaks or barks. I do have a bird and a dog, and it is just kind of unavoidable. We're going to hear them chit-chat with us sometimes in the background. I apologize if that bothers you. If not, thank you for being understanding. They're just my little work pals, and they do make noise, and that's just my reality. If I tried to avoid it, I would never get to make this voiceover for you. The other thing I want you to notice about my coloring style is I am trying very hard not to be a perfectionist about being perfectly smooth and the textures being perfect. I color in different directions, knowing that as I add more layers and use my little colorless blender later, things will smooth out a little bit more, but the texture is also really fun and adds some interest back there, and it's okay. It's okay to have lines going in different directions. Alright, so now that I have a solid base started in the background, I'm going to go in and start building up more layers of first the same color and then adding in more color to create more saturated areas. So I'm going all around the edges and darkening that in first, and then underneath some things like the branches or the little animals. But I definitely want to create that kind of pulling in feeling by darkening in those edges. And now we're going to switch up our colors and start building them in. So this is a little bit more peachy instead of so yellow. And again, hitting those same darker areas. I'll also, with all of the darker colors, kind of go around the edges of these circles again and again and again, giving them more definition. And then if you look at that reference photo again that I had shown, some of these circles will be darker or behind the other circles, and so they'll have a little more color to them, and that's how I separate whenever I have them stacked together. I will make one of the circles a little bit darker and also define that edge line a little bit better I imagine if you've ever colored bubbles, you could probably use a very similar approach to making these bokeh effects. All right, switching up colors again, going even more peachy pink and darkening in those areas again. You'll notice that my coloring style is very much like this, just layering, layering, layering. And what I do to get this effect here is I push harder on the outside here, and then as I work my way towards the animals, I'm lifting up a little bit more, less pressure. So more pressure down here and then less pressure as I move up. I'm also kind of creating pockets of color in this background. So some areas where you're seeing more pinks, some areas will be more yellow, and I think that just makes it so dreamy and pretty by doing that. Not making it all one solid color, but making areas that are like you'll see underneath that top animal is a little bit more pink, and then underneath the bottom tail is also a little more pink. And so I think those pockets of color really, really make the difference in this background too. I think if I decide to try this again in the future, which I know I will, I'm going to make these circles larger just to play with to play with the size a little bit. I think these feel a little small maybe. I don't know. You have to let me know what you think. Do you like how this turned out or not? All right, time to switch up our colors again and go with something more orangey, something a little deeper. And again, we are darkening in our edges and corners. I think with this background, we could be looking at either kind of a morning or late evening light with this glow. It's always been my favorite lighting effect. For those of you that don't know me, I went to school for photography and ran a photography business for many, many years. And so one of my favorite things to capture was always that golden hour light and getting these bokeh effects in my photos. So being able to put that into a coloring page feels really fun. I just think it's so dreamy and magical. So the next thing I did was I put in a few slightly darker circles in the background, added in a little bit of depth with this orangey color just to give that a try, and softened them out just a little bit after putting them in. And then I think later I also used my blender, my colorless blender, to soften them even more. And then you could also use the eraser to soften them again. As you can see, I put a lot of time into this background. It's a large chunk of space to fill, and so I can see why this was a request to see what should I do with this giant background, because it is a lot of space to fill. So I think this is a fun way to fill it, and it did take me quite a bit of time to pull this off. I spent 75% of my time working on the background and 25% on the actual animals and branches and berries. So I think past me would have not done a whole lot in the background at all if someone hadn't challenged me to do it. So this was an awesome request. I'm so thankful to the subscriber that asked me to do this. It was a good challenge for me. Okay, so for the next few minutes here, I'm just going to be layering in more color and deepening those edges and the more saturated areas. You're going to see me pick up a slightly darker pink next, and then after that, I'm actually going to take a gamble and put some purple in to the kind of bottom area and sprinkling a little in up top just to make sure there is kind of some symmetry with the color and it's not just in one area creating an unintentional focal point. But these colors make me really happy, and so I wanted to see if I could pull off blending in some pink and purple into this as well. So for those of you that are new to my channel, you may not have heard me say this before, but this was my first time using just one kind of colored pencil, the Prismacolor Premiere pencils on this coloring page. I normally use a mismatch of colored pencils that I have collected over the years, but for Christmas I did get a full set of these pencils. And so it's been a real interesting challenge using these and only these on this page. Normally I would be bouncing between all of my beloved favorite kind of misfit pencils, but this was also a learning curve because I've never used, I thought I had some of these pencils in my mix of pencils, and apparently not. I apparently did not own any of the Premiere Prismacolors. So it was a totally new experience using these pencils on this page. And I also learned that because of the wax content in these pencils, I couldn't use my beloved Copic white on a finished coloring page like this necessarily, because the wax resists that kind of paint really well. Whereas the Posca pen, my white pen, that actually went down okay on top of this. So for whatever reason, that material worked better on top of these pencils than the Copic white ink that I really love using. Alrighty, you ready for it? Here's where we're going to switch over to some very light purples to put this into the background. Same, I bet you could guess, I'm going to take the same approach of putting it in around the edges first and then working my way slightly towards the middle with it. And as I'm laying this in here, I am using the side of my pencil so that I can make this a really, really soft, gradual effect with the purple. I'm trying not to push with the tip of the pencil down onto the paper to create any harsh areas. So I'm very gently or softly putting this into the background and letting it build up slowly. I know some people actually do not prefer to sharpen their pencils down to such a long point like this, but I do for two reasons, and one of them is so that I can use the pencil like this on its side and have a nice chunk of color that I can color with when the pencil's on its side like this. I really like the effects I can get by putting the pencil on its side. And then the other reason is being able to get into little fine details with a really small long point on the end there. That seems to work really well for me. All right, and it is time for that more saturated purple. And I think this is going to be the last color that I really put in on this background. Hopefully I'm not fibbing. And I think it might have been off camera, I sprinkle a little bit of purple up in the top areas, just a tiny bit, to make sure it's not all down at the bottom. Okay, and I'm wrapping the purple up now, and now I'm going to grab my colorless blender. And I'm going to use this to soften any areas that looked a little bit scratchy, which I think is actually from my piece of cardstock behind my page. I think it had a couple of indents in it. And then I'm also going to use this to soften the circles. And this worked really, really well. And I'm sorry for the shaking of my camera. Still learning how to find a more solid surface in my workroom. But using this to soften these circles and also push some of the color in deeper into the page. So it's like a combination of things. It's kind of scraping some away, pushing some deeper into the paper, and then also softening out the edge of those circles and making them feel dreamier and more like a ball of light instead of like a hard an outline of a bubble or something. It makes them more soft. Next, and here's a lot of wobbling. Sorry, you're not gonna have to watch this for long. This is my Derwent eraser. I did not actually turn it on for this. I'm just using it to create little circles with my hand. Again, it's not on. It is an electric eraser if you're wondering what it is, but right now I'm just using it manually, basically, to create some smaller little spots of light in the background. Again, super wobbly. You don't have to watch this much longer, but I wanted you to see how I achieved that effect in the background. So this is another option. If you didn't want to draw those circles in first, you could come back with an eraser like that and put those in. Okay, it's finally time to give these little animals some attention. And I'm using my same technique, how I always color. I'm going to put in a base of color on the animals to start with. So I'm just starting with a really light color and filling in all of the white space, basically, just to give myself something to work from. So before I started coloring these little guys, I did look up a few reference images to try to decide, did I want to go in the direction of chipmunks or squirrels? I ended up finding this reference photo on Unsplash, and I really loved the look of this little guy. And so my animals are going to look more like this squirrel. You could definitely make these look a little bit more like chipmunks though, by basically putting that white area that they tend to have, which I think would be up on their backs, right? So you could definitely look up a reference photo, and I did not follow this reference photo perfectly for colors. I was more looking at where the light and dark areas should be, and then I put my own spin on the actual color, if that makes sense. So now with this deeper color, I'm just gonna bounce around and start putting in a darker layer now, especially in the areas that I know would have more shadow to them. And I'm gonna make the tail darker towards the center with a lighter kind of outside to it, kind of like the reference photo shows. And I'm also gonna try to make kind of fur-like strokes in there and not be just using the side of my pencil. I'm gonna try to make more scratchy little marks to look like fur as I'm working on these little guys. Looking back on these little squirrels now, I actually think I could have gone a little more playful with my color and gone with more like pinks, just because that feels more like what I like to do. But I think they turned out okay. I do just wish I had put a little bit more of my own spin on them. I think I was just nervous to color them a little bit because, like I said, I don't do a lot of animals. I've been trying to push myself out of that comfort zone though. I obviously have drawn these animals as line art, black and white line art, but I don't color a lot of animals, I guess. So I just didn't take a whole lot of risk on these little guys. I put most of my mental energy into that background. And so looking back now, I am just kind of wishing I'd put a little bit more fun color into these guys. So while I continue to add more color to these little furry friends, I do just want to remind you or let you know if you're new to this channel that I have illustrated several coloring books now. This is just one of many at this point. This is the Whimsical Woodland book. I have a Cozy Cottagecore book, which is my favorite, although this Whimsical Woodland one is the bestseller right now. This last fall, so in 2024, I released Whimsical Witches, which is really fun. I had so much fun illustrating that book, and it was received really well so far online. People have been enjoying coloring that one. I do have a color along for that book as well on my channel. And I did, my very first book was a mermaid coloring book. And then my book that I'm working on right now is going to be so cute and fun. I can't wait to release it in the spring very soon. I actually just have a few more sketches to finish before I can start inking in the line work. I'm really excited to share that with you guys. So if you like my illustrations and you want to stay in touch, go ahead and subscribe to my channel here so that way you will know about upcoming books and more color alongs and more just happy art making with me. I also really love hearing from you guys and getting your opinions on what you'd like to see me do as a color along, which is where this video came from. Somebody specifically asked for this page, and that's why we're tackling it together. So if you bought one of my books and you would love to see a color along on my channel, never hesitate to reach out and say like, hey, could we do this page in the future, and I will add it to the list. So this is going to be a community here. We are making art together. We are trying to make life more joyful, more colorful through art and coloring. So if that sounds like your vibe, stick around. Maybe think about getting one or two of my books. And again, if you like to print out your own books, you can always download the books as well from my shop. You can either go to my Etsy shop or my website, and then you can print it out on your own favorite papers. Now, a quick note on how I approach shadows in most of my work. I almost never use straight black. My shadows are going to have some sort of color to them. Typically, I will gravitate towards blues and purples for shadows. So for these little animals, I went with more deep reds, so reddish brown colors, and also kind of purplish brown colors, excuse me. So like a mulberry color is one of my fun go-to shadow colors, and I just think it gives things more vibrance and makes it less muddy or dulled down. This color that I'm using right now actually was a little bit too colorless for me. I would have preferred to use something a little bit more vibrant. But just so that way you know that about me and my coloring style, if you like using more like browns and blacks or grays to do your shadows, you can definitely do that and ignore what I am using right now. Okay, so at this point I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to start coloring in these branches for a while. And if you can't guess why, it's because I'm terrified of coloring their little faces. I am really nervous about messing up their eyes and noses. So I decided to take a break from working on the animals and switching over to the branches, which I find bouncing around in a coloring page to be really, really helpful. If you're struggling on something or you're nervous about an area, leave it. Go do something else for a little bit. Work on a different area and come back to it when you're feeling a little bit more relaxed about it, or you've distracted yourself long enough that you're ready to tackle it again. So I went and did these branches and focused on those colors and the shading on their branches. And I think that helped me come back with a little bit more of a calm when it came to the eyes and noses. I still wasn't 100% happy with how they turned out, but that's just a little bit of advice for you. Don't feel like you have to finish an entire section on a page before you can move on to something else. I bounce around constantly when working on my coloring. All right, deep breath. Here we go. We're going to work on these little faces. I, again, didn't really start with straight up black. I used darker reds and purples and browns. And then I think I eventually put a little bit of black right into the eye, just to help it have lots of contrast against what I knew I was going to do later, which is the Posca white. on top to make a little bit of a highlight in the eye, because that white highlight takes these eyes from like creepy dead eyes to alive and adorable. So highly, highly, highly suggest you have a plan for putting some sort of little white highlight in there. I ended up just covering in the kind of highlight lines that I gave you in the illustration. I just covered them up with my colored pencil, and I knew I was going to pop them back in with my white paint. However, you could definitely just avoid an area with your colored pencil and make sure you leave it the white of the paper. Just make sure you have a plan, because look how creepy they look right now with no white in there. It's terrible. I don't like it, but it's going to get better in just a few minutes. For the berries, I decided to go with one of my beloved colors, that kind of mulberry color with some pink as well. And I started by putting down a solid base color like normal, and then I pressed harder on some of them here and there to add like some variation, so some of the berries were darker or more ripe than the others. You could definitely go a completely different direction with the color of these berries though. You could go a little bit more blue, you could go way brighter red to be more like a cranberry or some other kind of berry. So definitely don't feel like you have to do the colors I'm using ever. You're always free and encouraged to use colors that make you feel joyful. This color just happens to make me feel really, really happy when I use it. All right, and it's finally time to put some life back into these cute little eyes. And this tiny change made me feel so much better about these little faces. Just a little pop of Posca white on top, and suddenly I feel so much better about this coloring page. And then I'm also just going to sprinkle it in around the edges, kind of like little pops or highlights on the fur as well as the berries. And I think that made all the world difference. And then I also, you'll see here in a minute, I'm going to put a little bit sprinkled into the background as well. Kind of like, you know, when you see light filtering through maybe your window or even outside, and sometimes you can see little dust particles or things in the atmosphere. So I'm adding that into the background too, which just adds another layer of magic back there. And so that's going to be it for this coloring page. That is how I tackled the background on this one. I think that this was a really fun way to fill a large space, and I encourage you to try it. Let me know what you think about how this turned out, and if you color this, I would love to see it. If you decide to share it on social media, make sure you tag me at the Swimming Owl so that I can come look at it and comment and cheer you on and share it if you're open to that. I am so pleased that someone asked me to do this page, so thank you so much to that subscriber. This was an awesome suggestion. Again, you are always welcome to make your own suggestions for pages you would like to see me color in my coloring books. Okay, so I'm going to give you a view at how this turned out in just a second. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. I hope you are finding time to create and make some artwork for your own mental health and taking some time for yourself, because you deserve it and it will make you feel better, I promise. All right, until next time, my creative friends, I will see you in the next one.